Chapter 11 of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, written by himself. It's a book about Frederick's life from a slave to when he became free. Chapter 11 is the last chapter. It talks about, Frederick talks about on September 3rd, 1838, he finally escapes, and he becomes escapes to freedom from slavery. In the book, he says that he chooses not to tell the roots or the means by which he escaped, because he feels like that would ruin it for other slaves who might be thinking the same thing, and it might tip off like the authorities to catch other slaves who might be going to freedom. So September 3rd, 1838, Frederick escapes, and he goes to New York. Is where he goes to. He stays at New York for a few days. He meets a man named Mr. Ruggles. Mr. Ruggles takes him in for a few days, takes care of him, feeds him, things like that. He then calls for Frederick's wife, a lady named Anna, was his intended wife. She came there too, to New York, and they were married. Her name is Anna Marie Douglas, wife of Frederick Douglass. The wedding was Mr. Ruggles and were in attendance. Mr. Ruggles provides means for Frederick and his wife to go to New Bedford, where Frederick was going to, go there and work. When he goes there, there's a family, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Nathan Johnson and his family. They took Frederick and his wife in for a few days or a week or so. Frederick's name at that time his given name by his mother was Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. He didn't want to keep that name anymore, so he had taken on the name Frederick Bailey. While they were sitting at the table, I believe, just talking about his name that he would take, Frederick told Mr. Johnson to go ahead and pick a name for him. And so he said he wanted to keep the name Frederick, so he kept that. And then Mr. Johnson was reading a book that had someone with the name Douglas in it. So he took that name and gave him Douglas. So that's how he came up with Frederick Douglass. There's a buddy named Mr. Johnson who helped him along the way that he allowed to name him Frederick Douglass. But he wanted to keep Frederick because, that was what his mother gave him. That was where they keep his identity, he said. Okay. Frederick stayed in New Bedford. He worked as a caulker. That's what he did for a living. Then he said that, you couldn't find really a lot of caulking jobs there, so he just started doing like odd jobs all over the place like that, and whatever kind of work he could find. He started reading a newspaper called The Liberator. He says that really, was like his heart and soul. He loved to read that every day. It helped him to keep up on the struggles of what was going on, slaves. He says on the 11th of August, 1841, he gave a speech. He was urged on by somebody named Mr. William C. Coffin, who saw him speak in New Bedford. And Frederick said he began to speak, and that's when he became someone who fought for freedom for other slaves. He says, "From that time until now, I have been engaged in pleading the case of my brethren. With what success and with what devotion, I leave those acquainted with my labors to decide." So that's chapter 11 of Frederick's book. He finally becomes free. He gets married to Anna. Okay, he moves to New Bedford, and then he starts his career that we know him as a speaker, as a writer, going around the country, doing different things like that. So that was chapter 11, Frederick Douglass, the narrative of his life written by him. Thank you for listening.